In May 2024, Shaktikanta Das, Governor, Reserve Bank of India, startled everybody. He announced that he was transferring a mind-boggling, stupendous amount of 2.1 lakh crore to the Government of India by way of dividend. The news was startling because of many reasons. First, because this was the highest ever dividend the RBI had ever transferred to the Government of India. There was a second reason why. Most central banks around the world had made losses. The RBI had made bumper profits. And the reason behind these bumper profits could be many. It could be the way accounts were stated, but it was possibly because all the banks in India had made huge profits during the last financial year, and those profits were transferred, at least part of the profits were transferred to the Reserve Bank of India by way of dividends. So the banks gave the RBI the dividends, and the RBI gave the dividends to the Government of India. This raises two questions. One, when banks made super profits, was it because of better efficiency, or was it because they charged customers for everything? For SMSs, for debit cards, for credit cards, for putting your money, for not having enough balance, for service charges. The banks have been fleecing customers for one reason or the other. Even bank locker charges were increased. And so the banks made money, but at the cost of the customer. And the RBI permitted it because it wanted the money so it could give it to the Government of India. Was the RBI persuaded because Shaktikanta Das's own term was expiring this year? Or was it because it genuinely believed that the government deserved a very large dividend? One needs to look at the chart very carefully. Look at the way dividends were always at a very modest level till 2018 and 19. And that was when Urjit Patel, who was then Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, resigned. And shortly thereafter, Viral Acharya, who was a deputy governor, also resigned, and in 2023 he disclosed that he resigned because the government was pressuring the RBI to transfer larger sums of money to the government by way of dividends. So while Urjit Patel and Viral Acharya found that not acceptable, Shaktikanta Das obviously thought it was perfectly all right. Why did the government need this money? Had the government been using this money for developmental purposes, which could create wealth, which could create jobs, that transfer could be understandable, even appreciated. However, this transfer was taking place to the government when the government has been reckless in its expenditure. The government has been reckless in its expenditure, giving people free food, free houses, free water, free electricity. And the government has said that this free food will be available for the next 5 years. Now, this is where the RBI should have played a more constructive role. It should have told the government that when you give money out, either by way of food or by way of subsidized electricity or by water, you are actually doing two things. One is you stoke inflation, because someone has to pay the price for the food and for the electricity. And there's a second problem. When you start giving doles and subsidies all the time, you cripple an entire generation which lives on these doles, lives on the subsidies, and prefers not to work anymore. And that is why the most savvy economy managers prefer not to give doles, but to create jobs, but to enable people to create wealth. The government was obviously handicapping an entire generation, and the RBI should have warned. Not that the RBI has been very good in other ways also. Look at the way the RBI has allowed Indian gold to be stored overseas. On the one hand, the Prime Minister says the colonial mentality must be thrown out. On the other hand, the RBI and the Finance Ministry allow India's gold to be kept overseas. Look at the chart, it'll tell you. When you talk about gold, there's another problem. Much of the gold is not always with the RBI. The gold that is confiscated by the Enforcement Directorate, by the Customs, by the police, by the various law and enforcement authorities, is gold that is kept individually by these authorities, and quite often this gold gets stolen. Look at the chart. The chart will tell you how many times gold has been stolen away from the vaults of the CBI, the Enforcement Directorate, and to date we have no information about whether the culprits were caught. The RBI should have insisted that gold should be brought into the RBI vaults. So you are reckless about gold in the domestic market. You're also reckless about gold being stored overseas. There's a third problem. The RBI should have again and again reminded the Finance Ministry that when you have a high customs duty on gold, you allow smuggling to take place. And remember, smuggling into India is approximately 80 tons every year, and the amount that is confiscated by customs and other authorities is barely 1 or 2 or 3 tons. This gold is paid through Hawala. Hawala degrades the value of the Indian rupee, and that causes both inflation and depreciation of the Indian rupee. Look at the way the rupee has depreciated over the last 10 years. That is what the RBI should have done. And there's one more area. Look at the way the RBI allows currency notes to be printed. Look at the way many notes are similar to each other. Look at the number of variants of a 100 rupee note. I can think of 5 different kinds of 100 rupee notes. Your 200 and 500s look very similar to each other. And when it comes to coins, of course, coins is not the Reserve Bank's forte. Coins are decided by the Ministry of Finance. When it comes to coins, look at the 10 rupee coin, look at the 20 rupee coin, look at the 1 rupee coin, look at the 2 rupee coin. They're confusing. Nowhere in the world do you change coins, do you change currency notes as often as we do in India. Why hasn't the RBI put a stop to it? Somewhere, RBI has been more interested in currying favor with the government by sending it large sums of money. Even the money is spent not very wisely and not doing its own job that it's supposed to do. And if you look at government subsidies, look at the chart. It will tell you how subsidies are multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. When money goes to subsidies, that money escapes the government because this money could have been used for development, for creating jobs, for setting up factories, for creating infrastructure. Instead, we borrow. And on borrowing, we have to pay interest. So as a result, money for development becomes less and less, and money for subsidies become more and more. So you have debt on the one hand, you have a crippling of a generation on the other hand, and you have a transfer of funds to government for subsidies that only harm the country and do not create jobs.